Going to show so that our people who aren't here can hear if they want to come next week and want to get some more context for it. But good to have y'all this week as we look at Revelation and what the heck it is. That's a question we're going to be asking this week. And before we kind of hopped into what we're talking about this week, I wanted us to kind of do a little bit of a review of what we did last week and kind of just go over some of those things. So, what did we talk about last week? Here's kind of an outline of what we talked about. But what were crazy people?
Carter and Mayhem.
Yes. So we talked. So we talked a lot about Caesars, kind of leading from the beginning of the Roman Empire, skipping over some that might have been more important for us as we head into what that meant for Christians and Christian life as our story was unfolding back in the first century. We talked about how Revelation was written during the reign of likely Domitian, which was probably in the 90s or so. He ruled from 81 to 96. And we talked about quite a few different things. David, I'll give you one of these. It's just a little roadmap of Revelation. Amy, I can print you out one as well. But we talked about kind of this idea of the Pax Romana and this idea of Julius Caesar going around conquering the world, right? Right? I came, I saw, I conquered, which kind of foreshadows a little bit about those four horsemen, which we'll talk about a little bit next week. But we see that we have different emperors who ruled. Augustus was the first emperor. Nero was kind of one of those emperors who did have some persecution against Christians. We saw he blamed the Great Fire of Rome on Christians and did some pretty terrible things to Christians.
While playing violin.
Yeah, he was an artiste.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh my goodness gracious. Yeah, he wasn't a great guy. And then you had Vespasian after the year of the four emperors. This was almost the Roman Empire's downfall. There was just a civil war that kind of broke out between different emperors. And then we had Vespasian who took over, who was a general in an army who was actually fighting against the Jewish revolt, the first Jewish war with Rome. And he was the one who kind of started the siege of Jerusalem, and his son Titus ended the siege by destroying Jerusalem. So there's some history there as well. Guy who built the Colosseum, and then there's Domitian, which is the emperor that we have likely when John is writing this epistle. He kind of claimed that he was master and God. He also had a very young son who died very young. The first half, he was kind of the reformer. The second half, he was just very paranoid and thought everybody was trying to kill him, which most emperors kind of felt that way in some respects. But that kind of gets us back to that. And there was an expectation. Good to see you, Diane. There was kind of this expectation that you would participate in this Roman culture. For them, religion and state were the same thing. You didn't separate those things like we do in the United States. But in that Roman culture, to worship the gods was a political statement. To not worship the gods was also a political statement. And so that is what made Christians kind of on the edge of things, because they didn't want to worship any of the other Roman gods or worship Caesar as Lord or God. And so they were seen as atheists in the culture. And so they were not honoring the gods. They were not living into Roman culture. And they were a new group. And so it was easy, because they were also a minority group, to be persecuted, to be pointed out as weird or obscure. And we saw that there wasn't a widespread universal treatment for Christians of arresting them or treatment of them or killing of them, whatever it was. We see in a letter from Pliny the Younger to Emperor Trajan, who came after Domitian, that he didn't know what to do with Christians. He thought they were just kind of this obscure group that he was like, I don't know whether I should kill them. I don't know whether I should imprison them for a while. He said, I tried to tell them that all they have to do is proclaim, Caesar as Lord, and then they could be let free. They could worship Jesus all they wanted, but they also needed to worship Rome as well, or the Roman gods, or Caesar. And so he was asking Trajan, what do I do? And Trajan was just kind of like, do what you're doing. You're doing a good job. Try to get them to, live into the piety of Roman culture, not just their own culture. And we talked about the story of Ignatius, who was the bishop of Antioch, and how he was taken to Rome, put in the Colosseum, and fed to the animals. And he said, please don't try to intervene any Christians. Just let me die. This is how I die for Jesus and show my faith. I'll be a witness to Jesus, which that word martyr literally means witness, one who witnesses. So we've kind of, in the 21st century, understand it now as one who dies for their faith, right? But really, where it comes from in the Greek, it just means to witness and see something and to proclaim it. Yeah. So that's a short-term version of what we taught last week. If you were here last week and saw that video, you know that it was a lot to unpack. And so I would like us to kind of start with this question of what is revelation, and just kind of get a pulse from y'all at what it is. So feel free to just shout out anything. It could be right or wrong, yes or no, whatever. What is revelation?
It tells me something I didn't already know.
Tells me. It reveals something I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't. Yeah. Anything else?
It's like a vision, right?
Okay. Yeah. It's a vision.
It's letters. It's
Letters.
to the churches.
Yeah, letters to churches. And do you know how many churches? Do you remember? 7 churches. Yeah.
Nice number, 7. Perfect.
Lucky.
What else? What else is revelation?
Like a warning.
Okay. Yeah.
Every time I've heard something, extracts from Revelation, it was pretty dark, gloomy, dreary, foreboding.
So
Yeah, not an inviting sort of thing, but suggesting,
Threatening.
not suggesting necessarily a loving God or a punitive God.
dark and threatening. Yeah.
Dark and threatening, yeah.
Let's go with that.
All right.
Apocalyptic.
Apocalyptic. Yes.
Apocryphal.
Some would wish it was apocryphal.
Oh.
And apocryphal means extra biblical in some way.
No, but wish it were apocryphal.
Yeah.
And then I was just thinking in the way John writes in general, he's super intellectual and also meanders through the cobwebs of his brain or whatever.
Yes.
He's talking about Jesus doing a gospel of Jesus, but his is more about the Christ. So people get confused. This is not quite the same. It's just the person Jesus. He's referring to the eternal Christ, the cosmic Christ, and that's not always apparent to the reader.
Yeah. So revelation of Jesus Christ, and I'll underline Christ because it seems like
This is like the sorting of
It's not his last name.
the good people from the evil people.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorting good and evil. I'll even just say good and evil because there's a lot of dichotomy, I guess is a good way to say it, because it's not just sorting, but even just naming good and evil, if that makes sense. Yes, definitely dualism. We'll talk a lot about that.
New heaven, new earth, the new Jerusalem.
Yeah.
That part's nice.
What else is revelation?
Dark, threatening, and scary.
I think that kind of culminates this.
About how they're going to be punished.
Yeah. Well, about punishment. I'll say judgment. How about that?
The end of times.
Yeah. End times. What would you say that is? If something is talking about judgment, if it's talking about end times, what kind of literature is it? I know we said apocalyptic, but is there another word for that?
Judgment.
Does it remind you of anything else in the Bible?
Prophetic, the prophets.
There you go. Yes.
Prophets are always getting killed off because they say things that nobody wants to hear, or at least the leader doesn't want to hear. Nathan, for example, to David. No, well, David wasn't that partial.
Yeah. This is a good list. I like this. Good. Good. I just want to kind of get y'all's brains started and rolling on this. I'm going to share this for the online people. All right. So what we're talking about is what is Revelation. And so I've kind of split up Revelation into kind of this genre-bending piece of literature. And I've kind of split it into four distinct things. And what's interesting about Revelation is that I wouldn't say it is one of these things. I think if you say it's just one of these things, you're missing a piece of the pie, if that makes sense. I think this kind of helps us to get a fuller picture that this is a lot to try and digest because so much is going on. First, we're going to walk through that it is a letter. Like Marion said, it's a letter to the 7 churches that are in Asia. And as we looked at that, we'll see a map of it, of where those churches are. But he says to the angel of the church of Ephesus, right? To the angel of the church of Smyrna, right? And this is Jesus kind of dictating to John about what he should write to these churches and their quote unquote angels. So we'll talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about how this is a prophetic work. This is like the prophets of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. Here it reads in Revelation 1:3, blessed is the one who reads the words of the prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and who keep what is written in it, for the time is near. So we'll talk a little bit about, is John a prophet of his time, and what does that mean for us? Then, you can think about poetry in this thing. Obviously, it's not in Greek. We're not reading it in Greek. We're reading it in English. So some of those poetic elements, you can't always see or hear them in the work, but they're there. This is a song that is in Revelation that is sung by the elders around the throne. And they say, holy, 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 the Lord, the God, the Almighty, who was and is to come. We've all heard probably some form of 3 holies in different hymns, right? What's one of them you can think of? Yeah, it's called Holy, Holy, Holy. You see, and that's part of our what is that called? Sanctus. When we are in the Great Thanksgiving, we sing that in the Sanctus. And Lord God Almighty, you see that all the time in songs. Who was and is to come. You see that throughout different songs as well. And so a lot of Christians throughout the years have just taken those lyrics from Revelation and just thrown them in their works, because that's what you do, is you take something that somebody else wrote and you make it your own in some way. And that's what songs do, but they kind of copied and pasted. Last thing we're going to talk about. So we'll talk about poetry a little bit and kind of get into what that means for us. And the last thing is that it is an apocalypse. And for us, when we say the word apocalypse, we obviously think differently than what they would have thought back then. There's still similar characteristics to what we think today as they did back then. For us, when we think about apocalypse, we think of end of the world. We think of some kind of catastrophe like zombies or a meteor or a volcano eruption, some event that causes this end of the world, this survival time, this time of like the after of what we've already experienced. And so I'll just kind of read a little bit. Hey, Donald, good to see you, man. And so here's just a little section that kind of represents what an apocalypse kind of sounds like during this time. This is from Revelation 6, verses 12 through 14. When he broke the 6th seal, I looked, and there was a great earthquake, right? The sun became black as sackcloth. The full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree drops its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll rolling itself up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Like, this is that apocalyptic language. It is this, everything is going to, lack of a better word, crap, you know? Everything is just not working out. Everything is not doing what it's supposed to do. Catastrophes are happening all over. And so we'll talk about what that means for us as we're reading through Revelation. And so we'll talk about the apocalypse. Any questions on kind of these four things? We'll walk through them slowly. Yes, David.
Reference to angels, not just spirits, and that means an emissary of Ephesus.
Yeah, a messenger.
A messenger.
Messenger.
From Smyrna.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we're going to start with Revelation as a letter. So here you can see kind of a map of the Mediterranean. Rome's right here, the seat of power. And here is where Asia is during that time. It's in modern day Turkey. And here is those 7 churches. And there's the little island of Patmos, where John was sent off for being a Jesus guy. Probably some kind of disobedience probably sent him to that island. And so it's likely, some scholars would say that Ephesus was probably his central location for doing his ministry throughout Asia. Ephesus is a port city, and it is probably one of the second biggest in all of the Roman Empire, or at least in this Mediterranean area, of commerce and trade and people coming in and out. It's a very important kind of staging ground for trade and other things like that. I think during Domitian's rule, it's the Neochorus, which means it's if Rome's not the best city, Ephesus is the one that they think is the most important outside of Rome.
That's the one with the book of Ephesians.
Yes, so that's one of the churches where Paul ministered and set up a church. And after Paul, he sent Timothy to be in charge of the church in Ephesus. And he wrote a letter there. We have it in our scriptures. Not all scholars agree that that letter was written by Paul. Some people say it was somebody who was using pseudepigrapha, which means to take on his name in their writing to give it some more authority and power. But we don't know for sure. But anyways, that's Ephesus, and it's likely that he would have taken a route around to go check on churches of different places. He would have gone place to place to be kind of their pastor in some way. Sounds a lot like Methodism in the United States, right? People would go on circuits on horses and go to different churches and preach, and
including Wesley.
yeah. So I mean, it's something that has been going on since the beginning. You know, since John was around, he was likely doing a circuit in Asia. And so he likely had some relationships with all these churches at different points at different times, and likely saw some of the problems they had and some of the good things that they did as well, the strengths of the church. So thinking about Revelation as a letter, this is kind of a basic outline of what a letter or an epistle in the New Testament would look like. You'd have your salutation, you'd have your thanksgiving, and then you kind of have the body of your entire work, where you talk about problems or things that you've noticed, or exhortations of, y'all are doing this well, but maybe you're not doing these things well, and maybe you need to do a little bit better on some of those things. Or they share about themselves, the author, and then they have a time of closing. If we look at Revelation, there is kind of this introduction to the vision in Revelation 1, the salutation of introducing what this work is. And then he's writing to 7 churches. You could call this kind of your Thanksgiving portion of the letter, but it's not all good stuff that he says in this Thanksgiving. He says some pretty mean stuff as well. So it's, both, I have this to say that this is a good thing, and I also have this to say this is not a good thing. Y'all need to do better.
He starts off with the good thing, though.
Sometimes he doesn't have anything good to say about some churches. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But once you get out of kind of that introductory section, Revelation just kind of barrels through. And this is kind of your body of the whole entire sections. And they're split up into different sections of, I'd like to say 3s and 7s. You have 7 seals that are broken. You have 7 trumpets that are blown. And then you have 7 bowls that are poured out. This is 3 distinct sections. And what you see, which is really interesting about Revelation, is you have 6 seals, and then there's a break in between to get to the seventh seal. You have six trumpets, and then there's a break in between until you get to the seventh trumpet. There's seven bowls. You have six of them, and you have a little bit of a break in between to get to that seventh bowl. So there's this anticipation. And I like to think about, if you think about the day of creation, right? There's 6 days that kind of all make sense together. And then the seventh day is the day of rest, which kind of just comes out of nowhere. You know, it doesn't fit the pattern of what we see in the day of creation. So John's kind of paralleling some of that. But you have all this body kind of going through and focusing on the things that were talked about in these letters in chapters 2 and 3 to kind of show the churches what is important most of all to Christ and the church. And then you kind of have this New Jerusalem, and then he has at the end, you know, if you change anything in this, God will, you know, smite you down and kill you. So don't change the words. It's a very threatening closing. It's saying, don't change anything I said because I said it and it needs to be said. And this is what God inspired me to write. And so there's still that general kind of letter aspect to this. David, do you have a question or?
So relative to Paul, what generation are we talking about? Was he's post Paul?
Yeah, he's post Paul. He's about,
Paul was actually during.
he's probably 40 some years after Paul.
So he's Paul.
Something like that. Yeah. We think 80s or 90s is when Revelation was written. We don't know for sure, but that's according to scholarship and looking at works during the time. Mm-hmm. And so I would like for us to do a little bit of an exercise. I'm going to split y'all into, how many do we have today? 3, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13. Perfect. I don't know. I know we got Lynn online, Ann online, and Kathy and Dan are driving. So participation might not be the best for our driving folks. But I wanted to split y'all into kind of a group of 2 each to read each section of the 7 churches. And they're laid out like this. So Ephesus is 2, 1 through 7. Smyrna is 2, 8 through 11. I want everybody to kind of read through their church. You'll represent your church or whatever. And you'll read through it and you'll kind of try to distill down these characteristics of the churches. There's kind of the structure to each of these parts of the letter. There's an address to the church's angel. There's a description of who Christ looks like or what Christ looks like. There's a commendation or a condemnation. Some only have a commendation. Some only have a condemnation. So just be aware of that. Some of the churches will only have good things and some will only have bad things. Some have both. And then there's a challenge at the end or an exhortation about things to come. There's an eschatological promise. All that means is that eschatological, it's a very theology term. But all it really means is that when Christ comes to make things right, when Christ returns, we're going to be in that time. That everything is going to be made right. Everything is going to be made perfect. And there's a promise that comes when Christ comes. Does that make sense? Once you read them, you'll start to kind of see, we'll be bestowed fruit from the tree of life. We'll be bestowed our names in the gift of the book of life. We'll yada, yada, yada. You'll kind of see some of those things. And then an invitation to heed the Spirit is at the end. All of those have that. So I'd like us to just kind of distill those things down and kind of share it for one another so that we're all kind of understanding what is coming into these churches and what is important for John to be writing. So I'm going to pair y'all off. David and Amy, I'm going to pair y'all off. You will do, y'all will do Ephesus. So you'll do 1 through 7. Sharon and Becky, y'all can do Smyrna. Kathy and Diane, y'all can do Pergamum. Don, do you want to hop up here? If you don't want to,
You just need the Bible to sit right here.
yeah,
That's all right.
yeah, that's fine.
Need the Bible.
Tommy and Kim, y'all can do Thyatira. Belton and John, y'all do Sardis. Marion and Maureen, y'all can do Philadelphia, not here in the United States, but over across the sea. And then if our online folks could do Laodicea, which is chapter 3, verses 14 through 22, that would be awesome. And I'm just going to turn y'all down and mute us, so that y'all can have your own private space. If that makes sense. And if somebody could be a spokesperson, that would be helpful too. So I will see y'all. Everybody online, I'm going to give you 2 more minutes, okay? All right. Does everybody feel good?
Oh, yeah.
No? How close are we? How much more time?
I'm not sure.
Oh.
30 minutes.
Sometimes Jesus. Is it Jesus?
Rita's reporting back.
Just reporting back these things. That's it. It's just saying,
Yeah, that was-
addressing to the angel. You don't have to say this because we all know they're addressing a church angel. You can say who Christ is, maybe the commendation, and the condemnation. You don't even have to try to interpret what he's saying. You can just say, here's what he said. And just kind of get him out, because I think it's helpful for us to just kind of hear it all together, if that makes sense.
Because we're going to read them in a second.
Yeah, or we're not going to read them together. We're just going to say out loud these things. And then
We're not going to read.
how much more time do we need
Sort of.
to get these?
Okay.
Y'all are done?
To everyone who
I'll give them a minute.
that's acting, like, no.
We're gonna transition back to kind of sharing these things. If y'all need to work a little bit as you get to your number, that's okay. Just be respectful of other people, but try to listen as well. We're gonna start at chapter 2, and work our way forward from that. We're not gonna read it, but we're gonna have each group share these things that are on the screen here, and give us just kind of a basis of what John's trying to say to these people. So we'll start with Ephesus first. Whoever has chapter 2,
That's
starting with verse 1. Perfect. Yeah. So feel free to share each part.
So we have the address that you said is in all of them.
Mhm.
the description of Christ is him who holds the 7 stars in his right hand, who walks among the 7 golden lampstands. And then the commendation is about how they don't tolerate evildoers. They test people who claim to be apostles but are not. And they have endured patiently, bearing up for the sake of his name, and they have not grown weary.
So those are good things.
So then we go to the condemnation.
Yeah, condemnation is
Get it.
they have abandoned the love that they had at first, and they don't do the works that they did at first.
Got complacent.
Yeah.
Or by rote.
It seems like they're more like they're worried about what everyone believes, but they're not worried about doing the things
Crossing
that
T's
they're
and
supposed
dotting
to do.
I's in a credo.
Man,
God, you must believe this or this out.
yes. So yes.
It's sort of, it says you've abandoned the love, which should be the essence of the motivation.
So that's the challenge.
And
For
it says,
them.
remember then that you have fallen and
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the
Go back.
challenge
kind of-
is to
Return to what you were doing before.
Yeah, return to that first love.
he also says if you don't I will come to you and remove your lampstand from its place unless
That's-
you repent. That seems like the warning.
That's the warning, yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
And then the eschatological promise at the end is that he will give to everyone who conquers, I will give permission to eat from the tree of life that is in the paradise of God.
Definitely. Perfect. Awesome. A few things to think about for this church in Ephesus, right? This is a church that Paul has preached to, that Timothy has preached to. And there's a little bit of a history of false teachers in some of those aspects. So already in this city, there was a history of that during Paul's time. And there's a mention in this one also of the Nicolaitans, is that right? And when scholars look at that, and some other people might have had Nicolaitans in their reading, is that right? Okay, perfect. Some scholars would believe that Nicolaitans were likely a group of people who had different Christian beliefs or practices from John, who were teaching a different gospel per se than he would. And it's likely that these were people who were accommodating to Roman piety. These were people who said, we can go to the festivals. We can go and eat the sacrificed meats to other gods. We can go and watch the gladiatorial events. We can go and participate in whatever it is. And so he gives the name of the Nicolaitans to them. And so what he's saying is, do not be like these people who say, we can go out and do this stuff. We can go out and worship other gods. We can go have this meat sacrificed to others' gods. Some would even say we can have the sexual immorality as well. We can go and participate in some of these festivals and sacrifice to the gods. There was orgies and sexual things as well. And so what John is trying to say is, do not listen to those people. Stick to the path. Do not wander off of it, as tempting as it might be. Don't listen to these Nicolaitans. Also in Ephesus, there's temples to Artemis and to the emperor there. So again, there's places of worship for these Roman ideas. And even in the Paul's letter, there was a problem of orthopraxy, not necessarily orthodoxy. And people kind of had that idea of what they're supposed to do right, but they actually just never did it in Paul's writing. And here again, it's kind of a similar, like, you have missed out on your first love. What is the commandment that Jesus gives us? We're supposed to yeah. And then what's the love your neighbor as yourself, right? So one of the greatest things that we can do in loving God is loving our neighbor. And it sounds like they are just doing a terrible job.
They're doing an appeasement. They're doing acts of appeasement so they can just get along.
Right.
They're not being true to their.
Anything.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, Kathy.
I was reading something, I go a little beyond.
Yeah, of course.
And it's basically, it was the upper class people who wanted to fit in their community. And so they did both sides of the coin, because if they didn't, they would be ostracized and they wouldn't be have their wealth
Yeah,
and
yeah.
status.
When we
and
get
all that.
when we get to Laodicea,
Or
very
even
similar
worse,
thing.
right?
That's kind of
Or
happening there.
even worse than just
Yeah.
maybe.
Thank y'all so much. That was perfect, amazing. You could lose your life. You could
Yeah.
go to prison. You could. There's lots of options
Right.
in the Roman Empire. Yeah, a prison.
Wish I could be there.
Let's go to Smyrna. Walk through some of these for us. Give us the highlights.
The rest of the angel is in verse 8.
Uh,
The words of the first and the last who died and came to life.
all right, that's Christ.
The description of Christ in 9. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich. And the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Commendation 10. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison, that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation. Okay. Verse 11, the conquering faithful. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who conquers shall not be hurt by the second death.
Perfect. So that's the eschatological promise right there. Perfect. Awesome. So Smyrna is an interesting one. It's also a port city, but it has a history of being very loyal to Rome, and especially in the expression of worshiping the Roman gods and the Roman emperors and all those things. And it sounds like in this passage, there's some kind of Jews colluding against the church, and whether it's economically, they have power over the church, or they go and talk to Roman officials and get their power to help persecute this church in Smyrna. It seems that people are either having threatening legal action against those in the church or the church for their actions. Because if you didn't participate in the festivals, if you didn't participate in the religious life, you were taking away money from the economy, is what you were doing. You were essentially not giving somebody that might need it food on their table. You might be taking away from their business if they make idols, or if they are a meat vendor, or if they are whatever for those festivals and those worship practices. Those people, that was their living. And so if you had a bunch of people who were not participating in those things, it became an economic problem, not just a religious problem. And so, again,
Observant Jews, we're talking about observant Jews who were followers of Christ, otherwise they're not Jewish. I mean, they're the portion of the population of Jews who chose to follow their
Right.
fellow Jew,
yeah, and I think when we look at
as opposed to the Gentile.
Yeah, when we look at Asia, a lot of the converts to Christianity are Gentile more than Jew. And so those who are Jewish in the area were actually, it seems like, according to John's letter here, were actually very much against the Christians because they had it pretty good. They figured out the system. They figured out how to make it work for their lives. And then the Christians come in and kind of throw a wrench in a lot of things. So thank y'all so much. Let's move on to the next church, Pergamum.
Okay. Well, it describes that God is the word of the one who has the sharp two-edged sword.
Yes.
And I think the two-edged sword is you either can live by God's laws or you can live by the world.
Okay. Yeah.
And he has the
Dualistic.
right to judge them.
Mhm. And the sword's coming out of the mouth, right?
Yeah, I
Okay,
guess, because it's
perfect.
the words of him.
Right.
So he's trying to tell the people,
Yeah.
you either live by the world or you live by God's laws.
Yeah.
And then he says, he tells them that they need to hold fast to their religion.
Yep.
And they need to repent. But a lot of them turn to gods like Balak
Okay. Yeah.
teachings
Mhm.
and Nicolaitans.
The Nicolaitans.
And then is it Balaam?
Balaam.
Balaam? Okay. How they say that. And those are gods that worship idols and immortality, fornication, adultery, all that.
Mhm.
And he wants them to turn from those ways.
Right.
And like I had stated before, is people of upper class tended, like you had mentioned, live both ways.
Mhm.
They might like go, let's say, go to church on Sunday, but on Saturday night or Friday, do whatever they wanted to.
Mhm.
So, and he's saying if you need to repent, and then he talks about the hidden mammon, which is communion, right? God given is that mammon?
Mammon is same kind of
Bread.
idea of manna, bread. Yeah,
So
there's
is
a
that
lot of
like-
connections you can make with that.
Yeah. Is that, well, when you think of bread?
Is this the promise of the mammon? Is that right? It's
It
that-
just says, let him hear what the Spirit said. Well, this is my Bible. Let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna. And I will give him a white stone, which I didn't understand.
Okay.
then.
Yeah.
And a new name written on the stone, which one knows except him who receives it.
Okay. So that's the
Now,
promise.
is that like
Yeah.
communion, receiving God
I don't know for sure. I can't tell you exactly what John's got going on in his head, but one of the
I think of
One of-
like,
one of the things that John focuses on is two important things. Is oftentimes he is copying and pasting things from the Hebrew scriptures. He literally just takes the image and uses it himself. That's in different places throughout the Old Testament. He just takes that and says, "This works for me," and it worked before, and it'll work again. And it's helpful for me to describe what's happening in the church right now. So some of those images can relate to what we read in these pages. Another thing that y'all might notice is at the end of each of these sections, it says to the one who conquers, or some might say overcome, or some might say another thing. The word is probably best translated as conquer. And if we think about what we've learned about this past week, who conquers? Yeah, the emperor, Rome. They are coming to conquer, right? And so for John here, the Christian is called to conquer in this way. They're called to overcome. They're supposed to do what Rome did to them. In this way, it looks like faithful resistance to what Rome is calling them to do, to worship other gods, to do these things, these immoral things. Perfect. Thank you so much, Kathy. I really appreciate that.
I got one thing I just thought to point about the
Yeah.
stones. You know, when Christ was tempted in the desert, I think the devil said something about I could turn all these stones into bread.
Right.
And that might be the
Could be the
reference
tradition
of
he pulls from.
stone
Yeah,
bread.
sure. Yeah, John.
The Bible has a interpretation of white stone may refer to the custom of voting for the acquittal of an accused person by using a white stone, indicating that the believer can be assured of his acquittal before God. Or it may refer to the sufficiency of Christ from the custom of wearing amulets around the neck. That was
Sure, maybe. Yeah.
Johnson is a reversal.
Yeah.
He's like, you're innocent.
hidden manna refers to the sufficiency of Christ for the believer's needs, as manna was for the Hebrews during the wilderness wanderings.
So it's a familiar metaphor.
Sure.
He reuses it, and that makes people think back to the original.
Right, and you'll look constantly throughout these letters and throughout Revelation. You'll see constantly this bringing back of images from before and just taking them and using them in his work. We're going to have to go quickly. It's 4:50, so we're going to power through some of these. Thyatira, who had that? Tommy and Kim.
Yeah,
Give us the highlights.
okay. So, and they don't refer to him as Jesus, they call him God's son. Notice that through all of this,
Okay.
they don't name him. But it says his eyes are like a fiery flame and his feet are like fine brass.
Yep, that's Christ's description. Keep going.
Not any of the pictures that I've seen, but, so then he praises them. I know your works, your love and faithfulness, your service and endurance. I know that the works you've done most recently are even greater than those you did at first.
Yep, commendation.
And then, but I have this against you.
Yep, condemnation.
That says some people put up with Jezebel, who calls herself a prophet, and allow her to teach and mislead people into committing sexual immorality and eating food sacrificed to idols. And then She had her chance to change and didn't, and
Right.
people who follow her are gonna have the same fate.
Yep.
I'm gonna put her in her sick bed.
Yep.
And those who, have committed adultery with her are gonna have a terrible hardship.
Yep.
And it's gonna put her children to death with disease. So they'll know that I'm the one who examines minds and hearts, and I will give to each of you what your actions deserve.
Mhm.
And then he says that the ones that haven't followed her, that you don't have anything to worry about.
Yep.
And he will give them authority over the nations to rule the nations like with an iron rod and smash them like pottery, just as I have received authority from my Father. I will also give them the morning star. If you can hear, listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches.
Yep. So they'll have a lot of power, smashing things. So, and what Kim described with the first part, the flaming eyes and the burnished bronze feet, that just comes directly out of Daniel 7. He's just taking that and putting it in there to describe Christ. A lot of these come from Daniel in those passages, but he's taking those images and just slotting them in. Jezebel.
That's how they were describing Christ before he was even born.
This is John describing Christ through the visions of the prophets that came before. Not everybody would say that some of those things were describing Christ. John does in this passage. The human one, or the Son of Man, or whatever you want to say. Anybody remember Jezebel from Old Testament? What did she do? Yeah, she wanted to kill Elijah. One of the biggest things that she did was she brought back the worship of Baal and Asherah, and this is where Elijah is for him versus all the priests, whatever, and he douses his with water, his sacrifice. They try to do it all day and they can't do anything, and he puts water on his sacrifice and then it goes up in flames, and people are like, "Oh, God is Yahweh" in this scenario. But Jezebel kind of was the person who led them to believing in Baal and led them to believing in Asherah and putting up an imperial system to have those priests having power over the Israelites. So he's kind of using this image to say she's trying to lead you away from what God is calling us in Roman society. Similar kind of idea with Roman imperial priests and other things like that. Let's keep on. David, do you have a quick question?
Move on, Dan. Any spurn?
Hmm?
Did Daniel spurn Jezebel at some point? That would have,
Daniel was a different time.
was a different time with
than
Jezebel.
Jezebel was.
Mr. Daniel, but
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
he wasn't somebody.
Yeah, John likes to take a bunch of different stories
And mix them
and
up.
put them together. Okay, Sardis. That's Sardis, John and Belton.
Okay, the address to the church, he writes, he who has the 7 spirits of God and 7 stars.
Yeah.
That was his name.
Perfect.
I know your deeds, that you have a name, that you are alive, but you are dead. Wake up and strengthen the things that remain, which are about to die, for I have not found your deeds completed in the sight of my God.
Right.
Verse 3, so remember what you have received and heard, and keep it and repent. Therefore, if you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know at what hour I will come to you. But you have a few people in Sardis who have not spoiled their garments, and they will still walk with me in white, for they are worthy. He who overcomes will thus be clothed in white garments, and I will not erase his name from the book of life, and I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches.
Thank you, John. That's awesome. A couple things to remember about this one. An interesting thing about Sardis itself. They
Right
thought
in the middle of all the others, and it was a central
Commercial center.
commercial
Commercial center.
to this theologian on
an interesting historical aspect of Sardis is that people thought that the Acropolis was impregnable, that you couldn't come into the city and take it over easily. But in history, it happened twice sneakily. And so it's this place where in the night people came like a thief in the night and took the city over quickly. And they thought with their structured system, with their buildings, that would never happen. And it happened pretty quickly. And so some think that maybe John was kind of making reference to this. And also that's something Jesus says, right? That I'll come like a thief in the night, connecting it there as well. It sounds like the church is not doing well, right? There's not really a commendation at all for this church, right? It's all just kind of like y'all are on life support. Like this is things are not great.
You just say I have a few people in Charlotte who have.
Exactly. I have a few people, out of this pretty big city,
In my book, it says, and he sits on the fourth row from the back of the.
And one of the assumptions is that people don't think they're doing things wrong, but John would say that they are doing a lot of things wrong, that they are kind of giving up some of their beliefs in order to be a part of society. Thank you all for sharing that. Perfect. Philadelphia.
We saved the best for last because they didn't find any condemnation in this one.
No, Philadelphia's all good stuff.
And they're all good people. Then he says that Christ is holy and true. He has the key of David, and whatever he opens, no one shuts, and whatever he shuts, no one opens.
Yeah.
And they have kept his word. You kept my word and not denied me, and you have endured. And the challenge is hold on to what you have. And then the promise is those who emerge victorious will be made pillars of the temple, and they'll never leave. He's coming soon, and he's going to write the name of God on them and the New Jerusalem, and they'll have a new name.
Perfect. Awesome. So in this city as well, this is a very Greek-centered culture, and had a deep devotion to Rome. There wasn't much dissension against Rome in this city. It was one of those cities that just kept true to Rome. And yet you have
they're the most adherent.
Yeah, they're the most that are adherent to what John believes is the best way the church should function in society. There's also some conflict with Jews in this community as well,
Yes.
right?
The Satan's synagogue, who say they are Jews and really aren't, but are lying, he'll make them come and bow down at your feet.
Yep. So it's interesting when you read some of these. That's the second time the Jews are kind of mentioned against coming to people. But our beliefs come out of Jewish belief,
Exactly.
and so it feels like this is a paradox that shouldn't be happening. That we should be on the same team, but there's this butting of heads. And John encourages this behavior here in Philadelphia. He says, "Yeah, continue to butt heads with these Jewish neighbors of yours." He says these Jewish people have somehow corrupted their faith, or they haven't done what they need to do. Perfect. Awesome. And to our online people, can y'all help us with Laodicea?
I can.
Perfect.
I don't know where Anne is.
Okay. I think she had to head out.
The description of Christ, these are the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the ruler of God's creation. And then this group is described as lukewarm. And because you are lukewarm, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. And he goes on to talk about the rich who have required wealth and don't need a thing, etc., etc. Then the condemnation, those whom I love, I rebuke and discipline. So be earnest and repent. His challenge would be, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice, I will come in and eat with you and he with me. And the promise, to him who overcomes, I will give the right to sit with me on the throne, just as I overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne.
Perfect.
That's all I have.
Yes.
Wow, Lynn's great.
So Lynn talked about this is one of the wealthiest cities in kind of that Asia area. It is a commercial center, and it's got many different temples with different deities throughout this place. So it's a place that easily, as Lincoln said, people are corrupted by wealth. They would rather cling to it. And like Kathy had told us, some people don't want to give those things up. And so you have to participate in the society of the Roman life in order to keep that wealth. And so you have a lot of people who accommodate to these practices. They accommodate their practices to the Roman piety of the time. There's a few other things in there that are interesting. But the one is, I think all y'all laughed at it, was spitting the water out because it's lukewarm, right? If you look uphill from Laodicea, there's Hierapolis, and that's a place that was famous for its hot springs. Laodicea had cold water funneled in through aqueducts from outside the city. And so some scholars think that this kind of idea of the hot water up the hill from them and cold water being put into the city, that both these things are useful in their own aspects. Hot water is beneficial for healing properties, for I don't know what else you could use hot water for, but
Hot chocolate.
hot chocolate, yeah. If you need some hot water for some kind of dish, yeah, sure. Yeah, cooking, all that stuff. And cold water is good for drinking, and it's so yeah. And so those things are beneficial when they are kept separate. But when you mix them together, the properties of each of those things is no longer beneficial. And so they become lukewarm. And it becomes difficult to drink in that respect. And it's thought that, it's not that the church was lukewarm as in they were kind of on the fence. It was more like they were completely way off, is what John is trying to say. That they're not like iffy. They are just completely accommodating. They don't care. They just want to keep their wealth in the city. They want to keep their status. And so this idea of spitting out is supposed to be visceral. It's supposed to be, y'all are just missing the mark terribly. And so there's that interesting kind of like idea of the area of like, John knew that they would hear this and they would know, like, you wouldn't mix those waters together. You wouldn't do that because they're beneficial in the state they're already in. And so it's interesting to kind of see some of those cultural things come out in some of John's writings, which I think is really helpful for us to see that these images aren't just pulled out of thin air. A lot of them are pulled from the Hebrew scriptures, and then some of them are just pulled from society at large to try and create this work of, this is what people are experiencing. They would read this and they would understand it. We don't read these things and we don't understand them. And we probably never will fully understand it because we are not living in those churches at that time. And the Christian movement was also one that was very small at this point. They were the minority group. They were in the low numbers of society. They were the outcasts. And nowadays, in America, I don't know what the statistics are now for who identifies as a Christian, but nowadays, a majority of people would say they are Christian, even if they're not practicing, even if they aren't going to church, even if they don't pray, whatever it is. They at least claim it on their lips. And really, you're not going to be persecuted for it. People might say some bad things about you, but being in the majority, you at least have some power to fight back against it. These people didn't have power to fight back against what was happening in their communities. In one of the letters, somebody even dies. Which church was that? What's his name? Yes, begins with an A. Antipas. That's Pergamum, I think. So he even names that this person was killed for their faith. Mm-hmm. Obviously, he's not writing to every single church and saying that all of them have people dying in them, right? This is just a small occurrence. But when Antipas is killed, he's saying this was a faithful person. This was a person who witnessed to who Jesus is. And for John, he wants to reinforce that fact. He wants to reinforce that you do not accommodate to the forces that are. It is 5:06. David, if you have one.
Just the whole notion that there could have been Jews who were on the fence because they wanted to believe it was Messiah, but there was always that pressure with the schism between those who believed that he was Messiah or that he was yet to come.
Sure. Yeah. And I think a lot of Jews were looking for somebody to save them
Yeah,
from,
to be more of a grand figure than
Yeah, of
somebody who
course.
gets crucified and goes around with
yeah,
folks.
it's paradoxical.
Yeah, it's paradoxical.
I had a few other things I wanted to share with y'all today, but we don't have time for it. We don't. Unless y'all want to stick around, it's up to you. But I know y'all got places to be, dinner to eat and cook and do all that stuff. So I won't keep you. Because we still need to talk about how it's part of the prophets. So we'll quickly run through that next week. Maybe we should add. I feel like we need to add another week. No, here's what we'll do.
3:45.
It's a change. It'll only take us 15 minutes to catch up. Do we want to meet at 3:45 next week? Does that work for everybody?
Sure.
As long as you remind it, sir.
See if I remember.
Get in the bullet.
Old enough to have CRM.
In midweek. Okay.
Oh, that could be.
I'm missing midweek, 3:45.
Okay.
Well,
We'll shoot for 3:45 next week. I wanted to make sure that we kind of like read through some of the letters, understood that John is talking to a real audience. Like it's not just like this isn't a letter for everybody. Like, and that's true with Paul's letters as well. It's written to a specific church that has specific problems. I think in the New Testament, the only thing that you have that is trying to be universal are the Gospels. The Gospels know that they're writing to a more universal church audience. They're not, and at the same time, they still are writing to a specific church context. And they reinforce certain things in one gospel and reinforce other things in another gospel. But I think the Gospels are as close as we're going to get to something where we could read it and say, oh, this is kind of written to me. All the rest of the epistles, there's a context to understand why they're being written. Revelation is true as well. And we see that it's to these churches in Asia, which have their own context. I'm going to let y'all go. I'm going to stop the recording. Thank y'all so much. You can stick around for questions if need be.